What are signs that a child is going to grow up a bad person? Story 1. Keep in mind, children and even adults can grow out of bad environments and habits, but especially young people. I would say a lack of empathy and remorse should be at the top of the list. However, some very malevolent personalities can act remorseful but truly feel none. And it's not uncommon for adults to say sorry but not want to understand what and why they did wrong. Answer: indeed. In fact, they can hone that pretense of remorse to Oscar-worthy levels, knowing they can manipulate people even more with it. Then they bank on people being too afraid of confrontation and conflict to not say anything if they're exposed as fakers. Top that up with everyone's short-term memory about anything, and you get the perfect environment for sociopaths to thrive. Story 2. Entitlement. And when they're downright bullying someone and parents brush it off but saying they're just kids and make it look like they're the only kids in the whole world who can do absolutely no wrong. Answer: I used to work with children in a facility where we had cameras up around the school. This was beneficial because if an accident happened or interpersonal argument happened between kids, we could easily show the parents what really happened and hold the child accountable. One child took off his belt and started to beat another child with it. We had the entire thing on camera. We showed the parents and explained that this behavior was not to be tolerated. And if something of this nature happened again, the child, 7 years old, would be removed from our program. The parents looked at me, laughed, and said, "So what? Our son is going to be punished because he has good aim." There's a reason the start of this statement was used to work with children. Story 3. Kids that have not learned that you can't always get your way. It's a domino effect of being awful in friendships, relationships, jobs, and so on. Story 4. When their parents are shoot. I just went through the school years with my son, who is now 19. I've known so many of his friends and their parents through sports and school. You start to get a vibe around 5th grade as to why the kid is going off the rails, and it almost always comes back to the parents. It breaks my heart. Some of these kids had sweet souls and were ruined by parents with addictions, mental illness, or insane religious beliefs. Answer: absolutely this. Shoot parents just love to decide that their kid is bad, born bad. It has nothing to do with their parenting, so they allow themselves to give up immediately. If your kid does bad things and lacks empathy and kindness, they need more parenting, not less. You can find always a way to motivate and manipulate a kid to do better. They're kids. They should not outsmart you or be more stubborn. And yes, I have kids of my own, and let's say one of them wasn't born very nice and cooperative. It took a lot of work and love to shape him to be the person he is today. It took a lot from both of us, but not doing the work was not an option. Nobody believes me if I say he had problematic behavior patterns as a child. But he did, and it was never his fault, and always my responsibility. Story 5. There's an interesting documentary called 7 Up. It interviews children at the age of 7, then 14, then 21, so on and so forth. Without exception, the kids that were shoot 7-year-olds grew up to be shoot adults. It's important to raise kids that you like. Answer: I became friends with someone who was on that documentary. Not one of the people you're referring to, I don't think, the nuclear physicist. His local coffee shop was my local coffee shop too, and we did quizzes together. Unfortunately, we fell out of touch after I moved, and he passed away recently. An interesting guy. I never asked him about the show, though. Story 6. As a semi-professional, I can say a lack of regulating. It genuinely seems like the root problem in so many children I see. As a small child, they cry or experience issues and require regulation being taught to them, and instead, they are met with verbal abuse and/or neglect by the caregiver. It's a very sad cycle for both parent and child, as neither ever gets to experience true comfort and are unable to cope with the normal deficits or shoot scenarios life throws in your face. Answer: There's a sweet kid who has been in the classroom I've been an aide in for the past 2 years. She is academically pretty on level with the grade, but we unfortunately know one of the parents, split custody situation, is pretty neglectful at home. Most days she would do absolutely fine, but some days she would get into these insane spirals. For example, she would lose at a computer game the whole class was playing. Most kids lose. Only the top 3 make the scoreboard. This is how the game works. Every time she lost, she would break into full-blown sobs and cry that everyone was being mean to her. Sometimes she will also burst into tears, saying everyone is being mean to her, even if no one is doing anything to her, and she just lost a pencil or misplaced her library book. It's heartbreaking and bizarre to see, and I know it's likely because at home she's the emotional punching bag, and when things go wrong she gets blamed. No one has taught her how to identify her feelings and appropriately process them, so all her body knows how to do is shut down and conclude that everyone is yelling at her for no reason, even when no one is even mad at her. She shows a large lack of differentiation. It's as if she can't really understand cause and effect in social emotional situations. Story 7. Cannot emotionally regulate, does not bond with others, lack of empathy, no remorse, fully gleefully disruptive and violent. Story 8. They have bad parents that teach them ignorance, kids that are only showed ignorance, neglect, abuse, told they don't matter, etc., etc. Obviously, this isn't everyone. Answer. A close friend of mine was like this actually. Her mom is a classic narcissist and taught her to be a terrible person. She used to bully kids in high school as one of those popular preppy girls and then became an alcoholic. But in her 20s, she realized it was messed up, went to therapy, quit drinking, and became a way better person. She's one of the nicest people I know. Story 9. They have no consequences for their actions. If their parents never punish them and always get them off the hook when they get in trouble, they'll grow up believing nothing they do is wrong. Answer. This is something my sister is now dealing with regarding my niece. Children ain't stupid. By 2, that kid knew her mother would never enforce consequences. She would always get something or get to go somewhere no matter what my sister said. Sister once told the kid that due to bad behavior they wouldn't go to the beach today, then less than an hour later went to the beach anyways. Bright side is sister finally had a wake-up call and has made a lot of progress in being a proper parent. But it's been rough on both her and the kid who's not being allowed to walk all over her anymore. Story 10. Elementary educator here. My colleagues and I were just talking about this last school year, and the theme was then echoed in another conversation with a friend and former colleague this month. The common viewpoint within the conversations is as follows. Traits that could be considered sociopathy in adults are presenting earlier and earlier, with each presentation more startling than the last in the students we teach today. Long story short, yes, you can tell, and yes, there are signs. For me, it's a certain coldness behind the eyes that could almost be described as a disconnection. I've only seen it a handful of times, and one time in particular. It's more than a lack of empathy. It's a complete void. It shows up in behaviors toward other students and toward adults. It's generally not the loud, attention-getting outbursts that, conventionally, we are conditioned to associate with a student experiencing some form of difficult moment. Rather, it's the sneaky, silent, organized, and calculated behaviors that are difficult to track and identify. Then, when finally caught and held accountable, nothing. No remorse, no empathy, nothing. Just a cold void behind the eyes. I define a bad person as a human with a callous disregard for humanity and the basic needs of others. This callous disregard can manifest in many ways. How it manifests on the playground grants much insight into how it may very well manifest in adulthood. Answer. I have to agree here. Anything that is cold, controlled, calculated, predetermined behavior at detriment of others and that you don't really associate with young kids is what I also identify as early marks of a fundamentally bad person. Reminds of this 65-year-old kid I used to pick up and drop off to extracurricular activities in my 20s. That was the most two-faced person I have ever seen in my life. Monstrous and mean towards me when no one was looking, and instantly switched like a gentle princess when other adults were around. And I have to say, the switch was what was so incredible. I couldn't believe myself at times. She once was coaching me to be on the lookout while she tried to steal treats, goodies from her homeroom class when all the other students and teachers had left. Never came across a kid like that in my life until then. I hope she become better than that when she grows up. Story 11. Every time I say this, I get downvoted into oblivion, but all children are salvageable. I worked with some really poorly behaved kids, to the point of criminally liable. I saw these kids really turn themselves around. I wish that all adults who work with kids wouldn't give up hope. There's always hope for children. Answer. I'm glad you said this. I was a troubled kid. Teachers thought I'd end up in jail. If I ran into a former teacher after high school, they'd always have some snarky comment. I was in an abusive home, and acting out was my way of controlling something in my life and also letting out some steam. I didn't really know how to regulate. I was always in fight mode at home. I moved out the day I turned 18, and all behavior stopped. I now own a paid-off home, have been married for 26 years, and we raised 2 kids. I have a happy, secure life. I'm still mad at the teachers who labeled me the way they did. I was a child. It wasn't my fault. Story 12. Do not understand the word no, or think that boundaries don't apply to them, or that flouting rules laid down is fun. Story 13. One of my nephews has me very worried for exactly this reason. Zero empathy in that kid. He's almost 9. His dad lets him run the home, the type of parent that threatens the teacher for telling him his kid is being disruptive and a bully. His mom is the typical trailer trash type, always threatening to beat up other women for disrespecting her, always dating an endless rotation of shoot men from Kansas City with face tattoos and a penchant for domestic violence, and then letting her messy breakups play out on Facebook. She lets the kid punch her in the face when he's annoyed and just laughs it off. As typical boys shoot, laughs her jerk off when kid threatens to throw the cat in the dumpster, does not monitor his TikTok and Snapchat activity. He already has a girlfriend he makes out with. What a mess. That kid has no chance. Story 14. Not being raised with warmth or love is a big one. IMO, I see it in a lot of kids where I live. There's this strange lack of warmth within the community. No empathy or emotional intelligence within anyone, starting with the adults, and then, as a result, the kids too. And the kids end up behaving like little bullies towards each other. I think that lack of warmth and love is a big sign. A kid is going to grow up with emotional problems that'll lead to all kinds of other issues. Story 15. Lack of discipline. Lies a lot and thinks they're getting away with it. Having parents who are enablers. Story 16. I knew this girl at school who threw her weight around, was just nasty to everyone, and knew she could get away with it because her dad was chief of police. He'd pull any strings. I've never been one for holding grudges from that age because I just think we're all different people now, but if I was going to guess, I don't think she became a very nice adult. Story 17. When parents are overly nice and let their child get away with things, you end up with a spoiled child that is also mentally fragile. Story 18. A friend's kid came around and told me my house was a saint hole. She also interrupts adults, turns every conversation into something about her when they are talking, and makes snarky remarks when you go round to her dad's house like, what are you doing here? Doesn't help her father doesn't tell her off, though. I full on believe she's going to a bully if she's not already. Story 19. I've been following the Epstein thing a bit. I mean, who isn't, right? But I was thinking about what kind of a child he might have been, or what his childhood was like. Because he appears to have had zero empathy for his victims and a severe superiority complex. Is that behavior that was taught or nurtured in some way? Story 20. Defiant oppositional. Aggressive or harmful to pets or siblings. Overly jealous. Vengeful. Habitual lying. And won't say, "I'm sorry," or accept any responsibility for failures or wrongdoing. Story 21. Habitually starting fires. One time it's just a kid being a kid, but when it becomes a pattern, it's sugar a huge red flag. I think it's even more telling than cruelty to animals, because cruelty can be kind of subjective. Think a boy eliminate rabbits with a BB gun or DIY traps versus putting a stray cat in a bag and beating it to passing. Answer: I was a pyromaniac as a kid. I had to go to therapy for it because it became an addiction. Oddly enough, I turned out fine, but if I had never gotten help, it could have ended badly. My parents never believed in mental health, so I had to take it into my own hands. But I wonder how many parents turn a blind eye to a child's behavior before it gets out of hand. It's sad. Story 22. Something I never really see mentioned is having a TBI at a young age. In all of the books I've read about true crime, and especially serial killers, is that a traumatic brain injury at a young age is a common thread. Now, I'm not saying every child who experiences one will turn out to be a monster, but it might be a thing to keep an eye on as they get older. Story 23. Even psychopaths can be taught to function well in society by teaching them tools to handle situations. Psychopathy has a very strong genetic component. They might not feel the same or any emotions, but they can learn to emulate them and not give it to destructive impulses. Their behavior remains primarily selfish, almost always though. Answer: I remember an interesting radio interview on psychopathy. One subject was an unnamed woman surgeon. She said that reading the criteria, she probably was a psychopath, and it probably helped her work as a surgeon. She didn't feel at all empathic with her patients and had zero issues cutting into them. At the same time, she saw an operation as a puzzle that must be correctly solved and was proud to do so, but didn't particularly mourn when she lost a patient. She speculated that other surgeons may be that way. Outside work, she lived alone and preferred it that way. She had learned to cope with her emotions, and her intelligence helped her fake empathy in social situations. Story 24. Wasn't it Ted Bundy who said that his parents were good people and that he had a normal childhood? I don't think there was any proof that Jeffrey Dahmer was abused. Makes me wonder if some are just born evil. Answer: good people, good parents. The scapegoat children to narcissistic parents are groomed to think their parents are great people, while their parents are actively abusing them. We know nothing about their parenting style, but unless a child is a violent sociopath, eliminate things at 2 years old. I believe all children are salvageable. How a child is loved by their parents, caregivers hugely impacts how they interact with the world. Story 25. Toxic friends community. You can do everything in the world to raise them correctly, but their friends and surroundings have the most lasting impact, and unfortunately, you can't do anything about it outside of moving them away from a toxic environment. Story 26. Bad person. What's the definition? Here's a sign that isn't about psychopathy, but just someone who isn't going to be the good friend, partner, parent they should be when kids need to resort to atrocious behavior to get any attention, even just bad attention. They're going to grow up without the skills to be a functional, healthy human being. That super annoying kid? Emotionally neglected, I promise. Story 27. Literally every antisocial profile fic bully I knew ended up dead, in prison, or dead with priors. I'm only 40, and this started happening in my 20s. Story 28. I took my 2-year-old son to the zoo, and He just discovered Nerf guns, so he said, "I'm going to shoot the rhino." But was 2, so he didn't even really know what it meant. There was no cruelty in it. Anyway, this older kid, maybe about 10, his eyes lit up and came up to him and said, "What did you say? I'm gonna cut the rhino." And then he was hitting this stick against the fence and talking about how it was leaving cut marks, going on and on about cutting the rhino. I know kids can sometimes try to be edgy, but something about the way he was talking and targeting my very young son, instead of me, just gave me these chills. So I said to my son, "X, it's time to leave." And the kid got this cruel smirk on his face, walked up to my son, still ignoring me, and said, "Is your name X?" My mama bear danger signals started going into overdrive, and I immediately got my son into his stroller and out of there. The kid was with a woman, maybe his mother, and she also had a toddler-age kid with her. But the whole time she was with the toddler and standing far away from the older kid like she was giving him a wide berth. As I was rapidly leaving, she'd walked over to us and I heard her, telling him off and saying to him, "You know what you did." Something about the whole encounter gave me chills, and I just couldn't shake feeling there was something deeply sinister and disturbingly wrong with that kid. My son plays with older kids all the time at playgrounds, soft play, etc., and I've never felt anything like it before or since. Story 29. I believe in a core personality, like a base program or something. You get a sense of how people respond or act in different situations, and they just never change. From what I've seen, a good person is always a good person, and a bad person is always a bad person until they get beat, punished, or scared into acting another way. Story 30. Generally, I just take a look at the parents. It's not always the case, but 90 of the time the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Story 31. She doesn't believe in fairness, and there's a good test for it. Ask a child the following question. If I were to give you 3 fresh apples and 3 rotten apples, and you had to distribute the 6 apples amongst 3 people, including yourself, how would you distribute them? My answer to this was something along the lines of, scrap the rotten apples, let's all have 1 fresh apple each. And my uncle, who asked me this question initially, said I was a very caring and sweet person, although that wasn't what the question meant. LOL, you had to distribute the rotten apples as well. On the flip side, one of my cousins who was raised by a man with very bad morals said that he would keep all the good apples and distribute the 3 rotten apples amongst the other 2. That shows he's selfish and doesn't believe in fairness. Story 32. My son would attack babies in daycare. As a toddler, he'd have screaming fits he liked to point like he was kicked out of his school 4 times. And on the honor roll 3 times. He lies, steals, manipulates. The last time I hung out with them was Halloween, and he had lost a personal item. He lost his game controller, and he started screaming. And just screaming at me wouldn't get back in the car, took off into like a very bad neighborhood. He's also a pedophile, just like his father was, and he's going to prison. And now he's going to prison after all these months of ignoring me. He wants to call me up and leave me these voicemails freaking out. I have a blocked, I don't know what number he's calling from, but from almost day one, he was a problem. He was trouble, and I was not the best mother. I'm not. But from day one, like from the time he was small, I could tell that he wasn't going to be right. And the older he's gotten, the worse and more bitter and angry and violent he's become. I feel so much guilt over having had him. But yeah, I could tell. I could tell from the time he was very young, but you just put your head down, you try to get through it, attacking people, lying, and now he's finally going to have to face some consequences, and it's terrifying him. Story 33. People who abuse animals are 5 times more likely to commit violent crimes against humans, according to a study and the FBI, USA. Story 34. My niece growing up loved to hurt animals and was spoiled to the point of ruin. She was born sickly, but used it from a young age to get anything. She grew up substances addicted and now lives in a halfway house. Story 35. Well, my brother is a diagnosed sociopath that was diagnosed at a very young age, 12. He liked to get fish from the pet store and freeze them because he liked the look in their eye. It's a cruelty to animals and other children while trying to maintain a good image with adults. Story 36. Unable to take accountability. Everything is always everyone else's fault, which led them down that road. Story 37. Hello, I am a criminologist, and I am going to tell you what I consider is what possibly makes that child become a bad person. 1. Living in a violent environment makes you prone to following those behavioral patterns later. 2. Not having tolerance for frustration is a very important factor, since we currently have childhoods where they want everything quickly, and not teaching them to control frustration can turn them into intolerant and violent people. Story 38. I lied more than anyone else I know when I was a kid. Didn't do it because I got a thrill out of it, just to evade the consequences of my actions. Lying is both the fight and flight response in any given survival scenario involving parents. It's the brain telling you it's the most rational thing to do. Say one false sentence and it all goes away. No one's the worse off for it. Now I'm an adult. I'm a good person with a good job, no criminal background, and I don't lie anymore, mainly because I don't face the petty situations that kids get into, like sneaking candy or whatever. I don't have to lie about it. I just go by my own. So no, I don't think lying is a good indicator that a kid will turn out to be a bad person. Just means they've developed a healthy sense of self-preservation, LOL. Story 39. There is nothing a child does which indicates with any certainty how they'll end up as an adult. Children do all sorts of shocking things, and that can include hurting animals. I know a very lovely man with a gentle soul who hit frogs with golf clubs as a young boy. People change. Story 40. If a kid seems to enjoy hurting animals, that's one of the big ones, or a manipulative behavior at a young age. Story 41. Shoot. Parents might have somewhat to do with it. Add poor education, poverty, and being treated like crap by the institutional. Yeah, that could be a recipe. Story 42. I've known kids that when they misbehave, get a nasty, downright evil look in their eyes. There was a boy I knew who once told people that when he grew up was going to track them down and eliminate them. Story 43. Constant lying while looking you in the eye. Seemingly no conscience. Bullying other kids, possibly setting fires. Story 44. When my sweet little niece posed and smiled for the camera in the last photograph he took of her with her faithful dog as we were taking it to be euthanized. Picture tells 1,000 words. It was chilling. Story 45. I just can't wrap my head around whenever I see a kid being cruel to animals. That and showing aggression, being a bully, hiding stuff, and sign of entitlement, to name a few. Story 46. Shoot parenting. Don't have children if you are just going to work to pay someone else to raise them. Story 47. They behave only when an authority figure is around. They will probably grow to be manipulative and gaslighters. Story 48. Align themselves with reckless bad crowds. It's tough to break out of the influence of your friend groups. Story 49. Having no consequences for their actions. My parents do absolutely nothing when my brother does anything horrible. Fail at school, attempt to emotionally and physically hurt our baby nieces, insult people using terrible words, etc. That's why he has turned into a beast. He does wrong things and when confronted, doesn't feel ashamed or regretful. I absolutely dislike it because my nieces and I have to deal with this burden in a human form. The most forbidden thing in our house that my older brothers would be severely shamed for doing, hitting girls, was done by him, and my parents did absolutely nothing about it. He is the only one out of all my family members that I think will most probably turn into a criminal. And I dislike the fact that I can't do anything about it. I do not support hitting children to discipline them, but there needs to be other consequences to their terrible actions. One effective one that was done on us was having our devices taken for 2 weeks. We learned to behave after that. My older siblings were hit, we weren't. Yet to me, all my siblings are as bad as each other. There doesn't seem to be any difference. They all disrespect our parents. They insult, they bully, and have many bad habits. Poor sleep, addicted to devices, unorganized rooms, etc. Story 50. IDK man. Toddlers can be possin and grow up to be a good person, or they can be total sweetheart and grow up to be the worst person to ever graze the earth. Story 51. One of the early developmental red flags is cruelty towards animals. That is typically what people who end up hurting people start off with. Not surprisingly, cats are the most common victims. Story 52. I was a teacher and school principal for nearly 35 years. There is very little correlation between the way a kid behaves at school and the kind of person they will be when they grow up. School is a strange place that requires absolute conformity. Many people who struggle to behave in that environment thrive once the shackles are off and vice versa. The single greatest indicator on whether or not someone was going to grow up into trouble was poverty combined with societal dissociation of parents. Even then, that is not even close to being an accurate predictor. Of those poor kids with difficult parents, the overwhelming majority grew up to be adults I'd happily share a beer with. Answer. A friend worked for about 10 years with kids that have been excluded from normal schools due to behavior issues, but were not in custody. She would tutor them, and most were okay, although most had the combination of poverty and bad parenting. Some, though, felt wrong. Then it would be arranged that she would always be accompanied when with these kids for her own safety. They were quiet with her, but she could feel that they were dangerous, microaggressions, etc., and were now learning to play the system. Story 53. Sneakiness lying on a big scale. All kids lie about stupid stuff like doing homework, chores, or getting up to some daft stuff with friends. Where it's worrying is when it's either all of the time or about something more important or malicious. There was a guy in our friend group in high school who would always be the one friend who was surrounded by drama. People used to fall out with each other around him, and a couple of times someone ended up getting ostracized from the group. One of those people was me. I came in one day and everyone was avoiding me, apart from this one guy. At the time, I thought he was a really good friend to me, as for months he was the only person apart from my sibling who still spoke to me. I ended up finding a new group of friends, but still stayed in contact with this one guy, and actually dated him for a while. I even came out to him as bisexual in the mid-zeros when that was something you were treated badly for, but he always defended me to other people. So I thought. The more years went by, the more I started to get suspicious of his behavior. He would describe himself as the group's unofficial counselor in every group he was in, but he always seemed to end up in groups that were full of infighting and drama. I felt really sorry for him, but also sometimes thought he overstepped boundaries a bit. Burr kept those feelings to myself. I bumped into someone from my school at university, and then I found out that he has been going to people and telling them stuff people wanted to keep private, or some outright lies. My old group ostracized me because he told them some completely made-up stuff so he could make me more likely to be his girlfriend since I didn't have other friends. He outed me to the whole school when I told him about my sexuality because I trusted him. Then he acted like he was the only person who accepted me while also talking behind my back about how bi girls are easy. He stole stuff from other kids and cheated on me, cheated on his next girlfriend after we broke up with me because he told me he wanted us to get back together and I didn't know her. A trail of destruction and pissed off people followed this guy because he was a sneaky, controlling bastard who managed to keep several girls because he isolated us and made us think he was the only person who liked us. Years later, he was involved in some really nasty stuff, and a lot of this stuff from before came out because people started talking to each other. Turns out he was always a disturbing guy, but he covered his tracks well. Story 54. Cruelty to animals or other children. Hurts animals deliberately, bullies or physically harms other kids repeatedly. Story 55. Kicking and terrorizing his dog. My neighbor's 7-year-old ruthlessly taunts and kicks his dog. He bullies his little sister and mom has no consequences. He's going to be a nasty adult. Story 56. Zero accountability, coddled and spoiled by their parents, and their behavioral issues constantly excused or blame shifted away. Story 57. Saw 2 little boys kicking and hitting their dogs. If I wasn't on the clock in uniform, I'd have either punted them or taken those dogs. Reported them to local authorities, but I doubt anything will happen. Story 58. The only common trait I've heard from people growing up is animal abuse or neglect, for that matter. There's one friend I have who said that one of the kids he helped raise came from a toxic home, and the family relationships were atrocious. Kids love to hurt animals for real. Story 59. Manipulating parents, teachers, and other children. Creating situations in which they can be the victim. Story 60. Poverty. Absent or neurologically. Impaired parents. Lack of empathy. Extreme hygiene or lack thereof. Abusive family members. Trauma. High pollution. Bad water. Malnutrition. Lack of self-analysis reflectiveness. Story 61. Being a bully. Being unrepentant for bad behavior and getting sneakier about it. Being a nuisance streamer or liking them, harming animals, reveling in children getting hurt. Story 62. Hard to predict. Known many horrible kids who truly grew out it pretty decent and the opposite. I feel like some things are reversible but should be addressed. Communication, therapy, and consequences enforced. A kid bad behavior can be rehabilitated but should not be enabled. Story 63. Lying. I've got 2 sisters who are pathological liars and always were, even as children. They have grown up to be sociopaths and unsurprisingly lie about goddamn everything. Story 64. Random outbursts of uncontrollable rage resulting in violence to objects or people, being an intimacy pest. Yes, this can happen as a child, young teenager, hurting animals for fun. Bullying others, being incredibly selfish and self-absorbed. Story 65. When both the parents and the kid have the same sense of entitlement. That combo's a ticking time bomb. Story 66. Kids' brains are still developing until the mid-20s, and the period from 10 to 25 is when the most development occurs in our lifetimes besides 0 to 5. This means that during this period, kids are highly capable of change. Their personalities are not fixed, and even if they have challenges, interventions can be highly effective to change their trajectory. But sadly, the opposite is also true, that harmful interventions or experiences can make negative behaviors more likely to stick or worsen. Lots of implications for public policy here, which is largely ignored by politicians who only care about saying what they think people want to hear. Story 67. There are many, but you know it when you see it, whatever the sign. If it's your child, you don't want to believe it may take some time to sink in. Story 68. Unable to accept responsibility for anything. I know it is common to sometimes do this, but if it comes down to lying or blaming others for tiny things, it is gad. Story 69. A kid who believes they're entitled to everything, even if it's not theirs, is probably not going to grow into a decent person. Story 70. Lack of empathy. If it seems like they're doing something nice for someone, but it's really a way for them to get what they want, almost as if they are incapable of putting others before themselves. Also, not reflecting on their actions. Story 71. Take down. If your child starts take down at a young age, that there might not be as much hope that they will walk the straight and narrow. Story 72. This question made me think about boy moms and the weird relationships some of them have with their sons. Story 73. Rich parents who give them everything and don't hold them accountable for anything. Not thinking of anyone in particular here, just saying. Story 74. A lot of people talk about the McDonald trio, but most people don't know about peeping Toms. A lot of serial killers and rapists start out as peeping Toms, as the skills to be good at it go hand in hand with serial eliminate violation. Story 75. There are none. I don't really believe in the whole good person, bad person thing. Everyone makes good choices. Everyone makes bad choices. Some people have conditions.